picture this, it's the dead of winter, and you're enjoying a perfectly ripe peach that tastes as though it was plucked just yesterday. No, it's not magic or some high-tech wizardry. It's the timeless ingenuity of the Amish. These masters of sustainable living have perfected the art of keeping fruits fresh for an entire year, all without a single watt of electricity or a humming refrigerator in sight. What's their secret? It's a mix of age-old techniques, a deep respect for nature, and a touch of creativity that might just make you rethink everything you know about food preservation. While the rest of us are fumbling with plastic wraps and cramming things into freezers, the Amish are calmly preserving their harvest in ways that have worked for centuries. In today's video, we'll explore the fascinating methods they use to keep their fruit as fresh as the day it was picked. From clever storage tricks to natural preservation techniques, this is a masterclass in simplicity and sustainability. Whether you're curious about their lifestyle, looking for tips to waste less, or just intrigued by how they do it, you're in for a treat. Let's get started on this sweet journey into Amish ingenuity. The first step in the Amish method of preserving fruits for an entire year isn't just about harvesting any fruit they come across. No, it's about selecting the right fruit at just the right time, ensuring that what gets preserved is in its prime condition. Imagine you're at a market and you have to pick only the juiciest, ripest fruit to make the best homemade pie. The Amish are meticulous in this process, and for good reason. Unlike what we might do with a quick swipe through the produce section at the grocery store, the Amish look for fruits that are firm but ripe, with no blemishes. Apples, pears, peaches, and plums are the main candidates because of their ability to withstand the long journey of preservation. Each variety has its own unique window of time in which it can be harvested for optimal preservation, and the Amish know exactly when that moment arrives. In other words, they don't settle for anything that might become soft, mushy, or overly ripe within a few days of being picked. For example, apples have a magical balance where they can stay fresh for months, but if you pick them too early or too late, you risk shortening their shelf life. This thoughtful, deliberate approach to choosing fruit might sound like common sense, but it's something that most of us don't take into account. Instead, we're content to toss whatever's on the discount shelf into the cart. The Amish, however, have made fruit selection an art. Once the perfect fruits are picked, the process doesn't stop there. Preserving them is like creating the ideal conditions for a peaceful, never-ending winter nap. The Amish rely on the age-old methods of keeping fruits in cool, dark, and dry spaces, and it's these exact conditions that allow their harvest to last so long. A good example of this setup is the root cellar, a structure designed to maintain the perfect temperature and humidity for food preservation. A root cellar is dark, cool, and offers just enough ventilation to prevent excess moisture from building up. You won't find fancy air conditioning here, just nature's own way of keeping things steady. Imagine stepping into a cool, earthy cave that feels like the perfect refuge for your fruit. It's that vibe. For us modern folks, not everyone has a root cellar, but we can still use basements, cool, dark rooms, or even insulated boxes in the garage to create similar conditions. The trick is to keep the environment as close to natural as possible, avoiding extreme temperatures or humidity. If it feels cozy and a little like a cave, you're doing it right. What's so special about this setup? Well, temperature stability is crucial. Extreme heat or fluctuating temperatures can spoil fruit faster, which is why having a consistent cool temperature is so important. Without the right conditions, the fruit might start to ripen too quickly, leading to premature decay. Keeping the fruit in the dark helps. Too light can cause degradation of both texture and taste. In essence, these simple principles of coolness, dryness, and darkness extend the fruit's lifespan. Once you have the perfect fruit stored in just the right place, you're ready for the next step, cleaning and prepping. But this isn't just about giving the fruit a quick rinse. The Amish take this step seriously to ensure that the fruit doesn't have any excess moisture that could lead to spoilage. The process begins with a careful washing using clean water to remove dirt, bugs, and other unwanted substances. The Amish know that even a small bit of dirt or excess moisture can start the rotting process, so they avoid soaking the fruit. Imagine washing apples under a gentle stream of cool water, then patting each one dry with a soft cloth. It's a meticulous process that ensures each fruit is spotless but not drenched. After cleaning, drying becomes the key. The Amish go to great lengths to make sure no fruit stays wet, because wetness can lead to mold or mildew developing during storage. That's where the gentle method of air drying comes into play. The fruit is laid out in a single layer on racks or shelves with plenty of airflow to encourage a rapid yet gentle drying process. This is crucial for preventing moisture buildup, which could ruin an otherwise perfect harvest. One of the most important aspects of fruit preservation is sorting out the damaged or overripe fruit. The Amish do this with an almost obsessive attention to detail. If you've ever bought a basket of strawberries and found that one or two are already overripe, you know how quickly things can go downhill for the rest of the fruit. The same principle applies to apples, peaches, or any other fruit that's going into storage. The Amish are experts at inspecting each fruit individually, and they separate the ones that are less than perfect from the pristine ones. The damaged or overly ripe fruits are set aside and used right away, whether for jams, pies, or cider. They don't waste a thing. It's not just about getting rid of the bad apples, it's about making sure that the good ones stay fresh for as long as possible. Even one bad fruit left in the mix could release gases that speed up the ripening process for the others. It's almost like a domino effect of spoilage. That's why the Amish take extra care to make sure that the fruit they store is in the best possible condition to last. Now that the fruit has been cleaned, dried, and sorted, it's time to layer it up for storage. This is where the magic happens. The Amish use natural materials like straw, sawdust, and even shredded paper to create layers of protection for each piece of fruit. Think of it like creating a soft cushion for your fruit to rest on. Each piece of fruit is placed carefully, ensuring that there is no contact between them. This is crucial because any form of direct contact can lead to bruising, which may encourage mold or rot. The Amish know that protecting each piece is key to the long-term preservation process. The fruit is placed in containers that allow for airflow. These containers could be wooden boxes or simple crates, anything that keeps the fruit secure but allows for ventilation. This setup prevents the buildup of moisture, which is essential for avoiding mold and decay. The Amish have a secret weapon in their preservation toolkit: natural methods of preserving the fruit. It's not just about laying fruit out and hoping for the best. The Amish use a combination of sawdust, wax coatings, and other natural substances to slow down spoilage and extend shelf life. For example, apples might be coated with a thin layer of beeswax to protect their delicate skin from drying out or becoming too exposed to air. This simple method forms a protective barrier that helps keep the fruit from losing moisture and spoiling prematurely. It's incredible how these natural techniques can keep fruit fresh for months without the need for preservatives or chemicals. In fact, some of these methods might sound familiar to those who are into organic gardening or homemade foods. It's a beautiful reminder that you don't need artificial methods to preserve the bounty of nature. At this point, you might be wondering, how does all this work? Well, it's simple biology. Fruits like apples and pears naturally have a protective waxy coating on their skin that helps them retain moisture and resist spoilage. The Amish method simply enhances this natural protection by creating the ideal environment for the fruit to survive in. By keeping the fruit in a cool, dry, and dark environment, the Amish slow down the ripening process. This helps preserve the nutrients and taste of the fruit, allowing it to stay fresh for months. It's as if they've discovered the secret to a timeless fruit salad that never goes bad. After the fruits have been carefully prepared and placed into their designated storage areas, we reach one of the most crucial steps in the preservation process: drying. This is where the Amish take the concept of drying fruit to a whole new level of mastery. It's like transforming fruits into tiny flavor-packed snacks that seem to last forever, even though you could eat them in one sitting. But that's a story for later. The drying process starts by using a dehydrator, or for the more traditional Amish methods, an open-air drying system. Imagine hanging fruit in a well-ventilated space, like a shed with good airflow. Some Amish farms even set up large drying racks where fruits like apples, peaches, and plums hang to dry. It's a simple setup, but surprisingly effective. The key here is time. Unlike the quick drying methods we might use at home or the microwave, if you're in a rush, the Amish rely on slow, gentle dehydration. This slow process allows moisture to gradually escape from the fruit, leaving behind concentrated flavors and preserving nutrients without compromising the texture. Now, don't just picture fruit hanging around in the breeze. The Amish know exactly when the fruit is dried enough. Too little, and the fruit might mold. Too much, and it'll become so tough it's like chewing on rubber. They wait for that perfect point when the fruit feels leathery but not brittle, slightly wrinkled but still juicy inside. This slow, controlled drying also allows the Amish to preserve a variety of fruits that others might have to toss out when they start to overripe. It's a bit like drying meat, but with a whole lot more fruitiness and a touch of sweetness. You could say it's like the Amish have unlocked the secret to fruit jerky, and they make it look effortless. It's an art, a delicate balance, and a skill that's passed down through generations. Now that your fruits are perfectly dried, it's time to move on to the next phase: storage. But not just any storage will do. The Amish know that for fruits to stay fresh for an entire year, the storage containers need to be top-notch, and the storage environment has to be perfect. So, what do the Amish use to store their dried fruits? The answer is often glass jars, ceramic crocks, or sometimes even cloth bags, anything that keeps the fruit safe but also allows it to breathe. Think of it as creating the perfect cozy home for your fruit to live in without locking it away in a damp, musty basement. Glass jars are particularly popular as they offer a secure, airtight seal to keep out moisture and pests. The fruit inside remains safe from the elements while still having enough room to breathe. The Amish sometimes add a layer of parchment paper or cloth between the fruit and the lid to keep it from sticking or absorbing any extra moisture, a small but crucial detail that goes unnoticed by most. While modern packaging might involve vacuum sealing or using plastic bags, the Amish rely on natural materials to store their dried goods. No synthetic plastics, no artificial preservatives, just the simplicity and sustainability that's become synonymous with Amish traditions. It's a perfect example of how the Amish do more with less. But storage isn't just about the containers, the environment plays a significant role. For the perfect storage, the fruit should be kept in a cool, dark place like a pantry or root cellar. These areas prevent the dried fruits from being exposed to heat or light, which can cause them to degrade or lose their flavor over time. Think about how old-fashioned cellars and pantries work: cool, dry air circulating freely around the fruit with just the right amount of humidity to keep the fruit from shriveling up too much. When the fruit is stored properly, it can last for an entire year, sometimes even longer, without compromising flavor or texture. That's the magic of good storage. It's like setting up the perfect time capsule for your fruit, one that preserves its freshness and flavor long after the harvest season has passed. While most modern preservation techniques rely on chemicals and artificial methods, the Amish take a more holistic approach by using natural preservatives. They don't need high-tech gadgets or industrial preservatives to keep their fruit fresh. Instead, they rely on nature's own magic. For example, one of the most common natural preservatives used in Amish fruit preservation is beeswax. Yes, you read that right, beeswax. It's like a secret ingredient that helps preserve the fruit's natural moisture while keeping out contaminants. When the fruit is completely dried, it's sometimes coated in a thin layer of beeswax to create an additional barrier. The beeswax helps lock in the fruit's moisture, preventing it from becoming too dry or brittle. But the preservation process doesn't stop there. The Amish also use sulfur to help preserve fruits like apples and apricots. By briefly exposing the fruit to sulfur vapors, they can extend the shelf life of the fruit while also maintaining its color and texture. This process is like giving the fruit a spa treatment, nothing harsh, just a little rejuvenation to keep it looking fresh. These natural preservatives are not only effective, but they're also a perfect fit for the Amish lifestyle, which values sustainability and simplicity. Beeswax, sulfur, and other natural preservatives do the job without any artificial additives or chemicals. It's a return to basics, and it's been working for generations. After the drying process, storage, and the addition of natural preservatives, the final step in the Amish fruit preservation process is ensuring that the fruits are checked regularly for quality. Unlike modern methods where everything's left alone until you need it, the Amish prefer to check in on their preserved fruits every few weeks, making sure they remain in tip-top shape. The Amish are meticulous when it comes to quality control. They inspect each jar or bag of fruit to ensure that there's no excess moisture, mold, or insects. They also test a few pieces of fruit here and there, giving them a gentle squeeze or checking their aroma to make sure they're still fresh and flavorful. This attention to detail ensures that when they finally open that jar or bag of preserved fruit months later, it will taste just as fresh as the day it was harvested. The process of regularly checking on the fruit helps to prevent any spoilage or surprises down the line. At this point, you might be wondering why all the trouble with natural methods. Well, the truth is that natural preservation methods are not only effective, but they're also better for the fruit itself. Many modern methods use chemicals that can alter the taste, texture, or nutritional value of the fruit. On the other hand, the Amish method relies on natural preservation, which helps maintain the fruit's authentic flavor and nutritional profile. It's like tasting summer in a jar. The preservation process begins with selecting the right fruit. You can't just pick any old apple off the tree and call it a day. The Amish know that fruit preservation starts with a meticulous choice. Think of it like casting for a movie. You need the right lead actor for the story to be a success. Similarly, for your fruit to last, it needs to be in its prime, undamaged, and without bruises. The Amish select fruits that are firm, ripe, but not overripe. If you choose something too soft, it's like picking an actor who can't handle their lines. It's just not going to work out in the long run. So whether it's apples, peaches, or pears, make sure you pick the kind that are just firm enough to hold their shape and have a decent shelf life in their fresh state. Any imperfections, such as bruises, can make the fruit go bad faster, so look for fruits that are free from defects. Like the hero of the movie, it'll be the star of the preservation process. You want your fruit to shine. Once the fruit is selected, it's time for the cleaning phase. Think of it as preparing your ingredients before cooking a gourmet meal. You wouldn't throw raw vegetables into a pot without giving them a quick rinse, right? The same principle applies here. Cleanliness is key in fruit preservation, as any dirt or pesticide residue can cause the fruit to spoil prematurely, especially during the drying process. The Amish are no strangers to thorough cleaning, and they use simple yet effective methods. First, the fruit is washed in cool, clean water. For some types of fruit, like apples or pears, this step may involve using a gentle scrub to remove any surface dirt or wax. This part of the process ensures that no unwanted particles are clinging to the fruit, and it also reduces the likelihood of mold developing later on. So, if you're following along, think of this as a fruit spa treatment your produce deserves the best. Once the fruit is clean, the next step is slicing it into uniform pieces. This is where precision matters. You don't want to slice it unevenly like a poorly made fruit salad. The Amish tend to cut their fruit into slices or halves depending on the type. For example, apples are typically sliced into rings or wedges, while larger fruits like peaches might be halved to expose the pit. The goal here is uniformity. If the slices are too thick, they'll take forever to dry. And if they're too thin, they may end up dried out, almost to the point of being cardboard-like. So aim for slices that are about the same thickness. Around half an inch is usually ideal for most fruits. Think of it like slicing a tomato for a sandwich, not too thick, not too thin. The more evenly you slice, the more evenly they'll dry, and that's crucial for a good preservation result. Once the fruit is sliced, it's time to apply salt, but hold your horses. It's not about tossing salt on like you're seasoning a steak. No, this is where the Amish knowledge really shines. Salt is crucial in the preservation process, but too much can ruin the entire batch. Here's the thing: salt acts as a preservative by drawing out moisture from the fruit. But if you overdo it, you're essentially creating a salty mess. Imagine biting into what you thought was a sweet apple, only to be met with the salty punch of a salt mine. Not ideal, right? The key is balance. A light dusting of salt is all that's needed, just enough to draw moisture without overpowering the natural flavors of the fruit. Once the salt is applied, the fruit begins its journey to dryness. Drying is crucial because it removes the moisture that bacteria and mold need to thrive. This is where the Amish patience comes into play. They dry their fruit slowly and evenly, either through air drying methods or in the sun, depending on the weather. The drying process can take days, but it's worth it for the long-lasting results. The Amish use simple tools like mesh screens or wooden frames to suspend the fruit in an area with good airflow. This step is key because the airflow helps the fruit dry evenly, and the low, slow heat helps preserve the flavors without cooking the fruit. Now let's talk about patience. The Amish are masters at waiting for their preserved fruit to be ready. This drying process isn't something you rush. It's like waiting for a cake to bake. If you try to speed up the process, you could end up with fruit that's not fully dried, and trust me, that's a big no in preservation land. Once the fruit is hanging or drying, it may take anywhere from a couple of days to a week to reach the right dryness. The Amish understand the importance of waiting, so they don't rush it. The process should be slow and steady, just like a good home-cooked meal. And this patience, it pays off in the end with fruit that can last an entire year without refrigeration. After a few days of drying, it's time to test the fruit to see if it's ready for storage. Don't just guess, test it. Gently squeeze a piece of dried fruit. If it feels leathery and pliable but not too moist, it's likely ready for storage. If it still feels a bit squishy or soft in places, give it more time. This is where the Amish precision really shines through. They have an instinct for when the fruit is just right, and they never skip the all-important taste test. After all, the final product has to taste just as good as it looks. If it's perfect, it's time to move on to the next step: storage. Step 1, testing the readiness of your fruit, the squeeze test. All right, you've dried your fruit, stored it carefully, and now it's time for the big question: is it ready? The Amish approach drying fruit with precision, and this is where the testing phase becomes a bit more personal. We're not talking about putting your dried apple in the microwave to see if it gets crispy. Please don't do that. No, we're talking about using your hands to test the firmness and moisture level. Here's where things get fun. Use the squeeze test to see if your fruit is properly dried. Gently squeeze a piece of fruit. Be gentle. We're testing, not crushing. If the fruit feels pliable but not too soft, it's likely done. If it's squishy, it's still holding on to too much moisture. The Amish do this with the same intensity you'd use when poking a mattress at a furniture store firm, but not with the precision of an angry shopper. You don't want that fruit to be as soft as a gummy bear, but you also don't want it to feel like a rock. Now, you can also use a knife to cut into a piece. If you notice any moisture or condensation inside, it's not fully dry. If it's bone dry all the way through, then it's perfect. Testing like this can save you from surprises later on, like biting into a piece of fruit that still has that fresh feeling you didn't want. Step 2, adjusting drying times, knowing your fruit's personality. Not all fruit is created equal. If apples were high school students, some would be straight-A students that dry quickly and evenly, while others, like pears or apricots, would be the kids who take a little longer to finish their homework but are worth the wait. Each type of fruit has its own personality when it comes to drying, and the Amish have figured out how to cater to these quirks over centuries of experience. Take apples, for example. These are the quick drying, straightest students of the dried fruit world. They don't need a whole lot of time to achieve that perfect dryness. A good 12 to 24 hours in a dehydrator or about 2 days in the sun will do the trick. But apricots? These guys are the overachievers needing more time and attention. They require an extra 6 to 12 hours to dry thoroughly. And even though you've set the timer, don't just walk away and leave them like you're binge watching a Netflix series. These fruits need constant monitoring. The Amish know that adjusting drying times is all about patience. While modern day appliances give you an estimated drying time, they often fail to account for humidity levels, airflow, and fruit thickness. You can't trust a machine to know your fruit's true drying time. So don't be afraid to pop back in and test a few pieces. You'll get a feel for when they're truly ready, and this is where the real art of drying starts to show. Step 3, the right drying environment, because even fruit deserves a good spa day. It's not just about the time, the environment also plays a huge role in the drying process. Think of it like giving your fruit a spa treatment just as you wouldn't get a massage in a noisy, messy place. Your fruit needs its own calming, steady environment to dry properly. The Amish know this all too well, which is why they've perfected drying techniques in cool, shaded, and well-ventilated areas. If you're drying outside, which the Amish often do, you'll need a spot that's out of direct sunlight but still gets enough air circulation to prevent mold growth. The breeze is essential, as stagnant air can leave your fruit soggy and prone to spoilage. Similarly, too much heat can dry the fruit too quickly on the outside while leaving moisture inside, like trying to cook a pizza in a microwave. The Amish use old-school drying racks, often made from wood or mesh, which allow air to circulate evenly around the fruit. When using a dehydrator, make sure it's in a dry room with low humidity. In a high humidity environment, you're setting yourself up for failure. The moisture in the air will prevent the fruit from drying properly, making it as hard to get the right texture as trying to get a good night's sleep on a too hot mattress. Step 4, avoiding the over-drying pitfall. It's all about moderation. Let's talk about the dark side of drying fruit over drying. It's easy to get carried away thinking that a little more time will make your fruit even better, but over drying can be just as bad as under drying. The result is a piece of fruit that's tougher than an old boot. The Amish have mastered this balance by keeping an eye on their drying times and testing for doneness early. The problem with over drying fruit is that it loses both its flavor and texture. What started as a sweet, chewy apple slice turns into a dried up husk that might as well be a piece of cardboard. Not to mention, the longer fruit stays in the dehydrator, the more nutrients it loses. So while it's tempting to let that dehydrator run for hours, you've got time, right? Remember that you're aiming for a balanced texture, flavor, and moisture content, not jerky level dryness. Step 5, dealing with humidity, how to handle unexpected weather like a pro. Humidity is the enemy of dried fruit. If you live in a place where it's often humid, you know that the weather can change like a dramatic soap opera. One minute it's dry, the next it's raining, and this unpredictability can affect your drying process. The Amish are well prepared for this. While modern dehydrators have moisture sensors, the Amish use a keen eye and judgment. If you're drying fruit and the humidity levels suddenly spike, it's a sign that things might not be drying as efficiently as they should. In cases of unexpected humidity, the Amish often rely on their tried and true method of bringing fruit inside and letting it dry in a controlled indoor environment. This is especially crucial in the fall and spring months when the air can fluctuate between dry and damp. The key here is flexibility and adaptability. Keep an eye on the weather and don't be afraid to bring the drying process indoors if conditions get too humid outside. By adjusting and responding to changing weather, you'll keep your drying process on track and prevent that pesky humidity from ruining all your hard work. Once your fruit is fully dried, the next step is knowing how to rehydrate it properly when the time comes. The Amish have a saying, "Don't rush the rehydration." The art of soaking dried fruit to bring it back to its original glory is as important as the drying process itself. You can't just throw your dried apples in a pot of water and call it a day. That's a rookie move. The Amish take their time with rehydration, ensuring that each piece gets soaked for just the right amount of time. Generally, dried fruit should be soaked for about 15 to 30 minutes in warm, not boiling water. The key here is gentleness. Too much heat and you'll end up with mushy, soggy fruit that's about as appetizing as a wet sponge. The goal is to bring back the texture and juiciness without turning your fruit into a sad, squishy version of itself. And here's the Amish twist. They often add a little bit of cinnamon or nutmeg to the soaking water for extra flavor. This adds a lovely aroma and depth of taste that makes rehydrated fruit feel like a treat rather than a necessity. Just make sure to drain it properly after soaking. You don't want your fruit swimming in water, as this can make it soggy and ruin the texture. Think of it like a gentle spa for your fruit, giving it a refresh but not a full-on makeover. Now that you've mastered the drying and rehydrating process, the next challenge is keeping your fruit fresh for the long term. The Amish approach storage with care and strategy. After all, The point of drying fruit is to extend its shelf life, so you don't want to ruin all that hard work by storing it incorrectly. First, always make sure your fruit is completely cooled before storing it. No hot fruit going into jars or bags, please. Hot fruit will create condensation, which leads to mold. That's the last thing you want. Once it's cooled, use airtight containers to store your dried fruit. Glass jars are a favorite among the Amish because they're eco-friendly and provide an airtight seal that keeps your fruit fresh longer. You can also use vacuum-sealed bags for a more modern touch. The key to long-term storage, however, is avoiding light and heat. If you leave your jars on a sunny windowsill or in a warm pantry, your fruit will lose its nutrients and flavor more quickly. The Amish suggest storing dried fruit in a cool, dark place like a cupboard or basement. Some even use root cellars for this purpose, where the temperature remains stable and the humidity low, which is ideal for preserving the quality of the dried fruit. While drying fruit, the Amish know the battle isn't over once the fruit is dried. Mold and spoilage are lurking dangers, and even a small amount of moisture left in the fruit can cause these unwelcome guests to show up. To avoid this, it's important to inspect your dried fruit carefully before storing it. After drying, always do a final check for any soft spots or pieces that might have dried unevenly. Any fruit that feels even a little damp or sticky should be put aside and dried a bit longer. If you find a piece that's slightly moldy, toss it out immediately. It's not worth risking contamination for the rest of your batch. The Amish are meticulous when it comes to this last step. They recommend using a desiccant packet, yes, like the ones you find in your new shoeboxes inside the storage container. These packets absorb any excess moisture that may have sneaked past your drying process, keeping mold and spoilage at bay. Just make sure to remove the packet before eating the fruit unless you're in the mood for a crunchy snack that's not quite fruit. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, things go wrong. You might find your dried fruit is too tough, too chewy, or just doesn't taste right. The Amish have had centuries to perfect their methods, but even they admit that the drying process isn't foolproof. Fortunately, they've learned to troubleshoot most common issues. This is a classic case of overdrying. When you've let your fruit go too long, it can turn into something that feels like chewing on a rubber band. The key here is to keep an eye on your drying times and check the fruit often. If you've already overdone it, rehydrating the fruit can help soften it, but it will never get back to its original, tender texture. So the lesson here is don't overdry. And if you do, use the fruit for making jams or smoothies. On the other hand, if your fruit is still too moist after drying, the issue could be one of two things: too little drying time or too high humidity. The Amish advise being extra cautious with humidity levels. If you're drying fruit on a humid day, even a dehydrator may not be enough to fully dry your fruit. In this case, give it more time and keep checking with the squeeze test. If the moisture is still there, give it another round of drying. The dreaded mold. If you see mold on your dried fruit, it means the drying process wasn't complete, or it was stored in a place that was too humid. The Amish know the importance of checking fruit during drying and storing it in the right conditions. If you encounter mold, throw out the affected fruit and inspect the rest of the batch. Next time, make sure you're drying your fruit in the right environment with plenty of airflow and no direct exposure to moisture. So there you go. You're now officially on your way to drying fruit like an Amish expert. The process may take a little time, but hey, good things come to those who wait, and the sweet, tangy rewards will be more than worth it. Now go forth and preserve, and may your fruits remain as fresh as the day you picked them for the next year. Who knew preserving fruit could feel this rewarding, right?